Welcome back to Natural 2, our unscripted D&D tabletop role-playing talk show podcast. We really need to pin down precisely what this introduction needs to include. But today is a very interesting day. We say that almost every single time, but today I actually mean it. We ended our almost 2-year campaign. It was about a year and 8 months, 7 months, somewhere in that range. So I'm just going to round it up and say about 2 years. We started the campaign back in January of 2021, and we just concluded it this past weekend. And we concluded it in a rather odd way, which might be next week's episode. We'll cover why that occurred. But for this week, we're going to focus on the campaign as a whole, the lessons we learned, I guess a few stories maybe sprinkled in, depending on how we're feeling. But I guess I'll throw it over to you, Sir James. You came into the campaign about 4 or 5 months after we began, somewhere in that time frame. But you've certainly been just as involved after arriving somewhat late. And yeah, what's your general feelings on it now being concluded?
So, I really like how the group grew over the course of the campaign, and I mean, uh, both out of character and in character, but almost more so out of character. There were a lot of opportunities for the campaign to go wrong, to become a horror story, or for people to get fed up and leave. And we weathered that through a combination of everybody's efforts and attitudes. So that's almost more of an achievement, let's say, than the campaign itself or the things that we did in the world of Asmiliath.
Yeah, I think a big piece of context is everybody except you were basically new to D&D. I was aware of D&D and I had a lot of the books growing up as a kid, but I had never played in a serious game before. And so this was my first experience running anything that wasn't like trying to force my family to play, which never goes well. And then all the other players besides yourself, I think, are in the exact same boat. They had either only played a very small amount or had never played at all. So the fact that that group still lasts, but that campaign ended up lasting almost 2 years is insane. Like the amount of learning and I don't want to say like pain, but just like the self-reflection required to adjust on the fly to, form this group, that is by far, the most astounding accomplishment we achieved. And I'm very proud of the group for that. Especially now the group is going to continue doing other things as well, and we're going to be better for it. So,
yeah, the group is not over,
mm-hmm.
just the campaign. And I don't want to make myself sound like some kind of sage or expert, because I'm definitely not. But I think I can remember having some thoughts along those lines in the very beginning of, there were definitely some things that I felt like you could tell that it's a new group of new players.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody for the most part had the spirit. And I think that that's something in this hobby that is almost impossible to try to correct for or filter when
Or
you're looking
teach.
for players or DMs. Yeah, it's very, it's that buy-in and that willingness to communicate and connect, and just having the love in your heart.
Mm-hmm.
You can't teach it, and you can't fix it, and you almost can't even look for it. You just have to get lucky. At least that's been my experience ever since I first started. And we've definitely got some of that.
So to actually begin, I guess, touching upon the lessons that were learned or the things that got improved over time, the first broad statement I'm going to make, and we will refer to the video that we made on this, is communication was something that became more and more necessary as we went along. There is absolutely no way that you can run a 2 year long or longer campaign without having very good communication with your group. And when I say communication, that is a lot of different ways, whether, you have an active Discord or you talk all the time or you have like preemptive parts before the session where you discuss things or debriefs at the end where you kind of get everyone's opinions. You have to have a good finger on the pulse of your group, at least as a DM. And I would say that maybe our group probably has a bit more, I guess, room to grow in this aspect, but the group's communication as well, that was pretty rough in the beginning, and it's in a decent place now, but again, I think could also maybe be a bit more, not inclusive, what's what I'm looking for. Conclusive might be exactly what I'm trying to say. But yes, communication is the baseline of all of the issues that we might bring up, or the problems that we bring up, or the lessons that we learned. So that would be the first piece of advice I would throw out there, or the first thought to kind of mull over, because that was something that I don't want to say tortured me, but weighed heavy on me throughout the campaign, where like I might have had to bring up an uncomfortable subject to somebody, or correct some behavior that was happening, or try and mediate an issue between players. That stuff is never fun, and it almost always falls as the DM's responsibility. And having to learn to navigate that while also playing the game is not an easy feat all of the time.
I think that a pretty simple way of thinking about it is you should approach a group that you are joining or forming like you are making friends, or with that mindset, and mentally prepared to try to make some new friends. There are some prominent D&D figures that have expressed an attitude of I D&D is what I do with my friends. I run D&D for my friends. I don't run D&D for people that, I got the sense that I've gotten the sense from people that I don't want to run D&D for people that I don't already know or that aren't already my friends. It's something that I do with my friends. And I think that, dare I use this word, that's kind of a privileged stance,
Hmm.
because I know that if I waited to make the appropriate number of friends that also happen to be interested in D&D, I would have never played D&D to this day.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think you're forming a group, D&D group, or you're joining a D&D group, and you're also signing up some new friends, because that is the level of communication and fellow feeling that you need to have if the group is going to be its best and if it's going to last.
Hmm. I think there's a pretty interesting thing you could, I guess, examine throughout our game is not only the party, like the characters in the game, but the players in the group outside the game were kind of doing mirrored journeys of each other, right? Like the characters are trying to figure out who each other are and how they function and where they can kind of poke or prod or have conversations. Outside of character, people are trying to learn more about the person and feel more comfortable talking to them and feel a bit more friendly towards them. And so while the group was like kind of getting closer and I guess a more well-oiled machine, the party outside the game was kind of doing that at the same time. And I think it showcases through all of us are very different people. Like I don't think we would get together and be friends outside of this, and that's not a bad thing. Like, that's not a negative thing at all. But it is our shared interest in this hobby, and then our, I guess, willingness to open it up to other people that allows us all to be friends, even though we are on vastly different spectrums of human beings. So that's something cool to kind of take out of it as well.
This is the thing in our life that brought us together, because there's
Hmm.
nothing else. There's no other thing that's going to coincidentally have caused us to bump into each other and strike up a conversation.
Hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And that is something about the hobby that people should embrace.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't think that this is straying into territory for next week, although I'm not going to say a whole lot about it right now. But I also think that that's one of the reasons why we felt like it was time for the campaign to conclude, is because in that sense of what you were just describing about us coming together as a group and growing as a group, it had sort of served its purpose.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of things that I'm sure we'll get into about why we wrapped it up and why we wrapped it up the way that we did and the time
Hmm.
that we did. But I would include that is that we uh we got what we needed, and it was maybe time to graduate.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think to try and give us a little bit more structure, I might ask you some direct questions, sir, and see if we can spur some answers.
Hit me.
One of the things I've always been curious about, because I have a kind of like a 50-50 track record as far as this goes, introducing new players into a long-running campaign and a established group is sometimes very difficult. And you are the prime example of introducing someone late and then incorporating to the point where I honestly can't remember the game without you. So, how did that feel like during it and after it? Certain thoughts that arise as things that you thought were handled well, or maybe could have been handled differently. Just the spectrum of that entrance.
The I felt like that it worked pretty well.
Hmm.
The way that I was brought in made sense. For the most part, it didn't take us out of the game. We'll put it that
Hmm.
way. It's always a little awkward when you've got an established party and you're trying to shoehorn in this other character that if they were an NPC, there might be no reason that the party continues to talk to them, but
Hmm.
because there's a human being sitting there, they have to talk to them and they have to include them and sort of
Yeah.
get over it. Um, but I think that there was a lot of good character moments in my character's introduction that really worked well to provide a sense of what are these characters about. There were actually two new characters that were introduced at the same time, but we
Hmm.
won't belabor that point. Uh, the the only thing that I would say to examine, because I'm not prepared to say that it's something that should have been done differently, but maybe if there's a way that it could be done differently, is um, after I was added, there was still a session. Like there were two. It was 2 weeks before my character was brought in, um, and I understood why. And it was, well, in search of a good place to insert a new character.
Hmm.
I think that a general piece of advice for people who are listening is that if you know that you want to add a new person, you can start figuring out when and how you would do that before you've even officially added that person to the group so that it's ready to go.
Hmm.
And you don't have to say, congratulations, now be back here in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Um,
there is a
Especially if
lot
you're in
of.
one of those groups. If you're in one of those groups that, God help you, plays once a month or twice a month, you really don't want to be in that boat.
Hmm.
Um, but that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, that was, I certainly agree with you on that point, but there was a lot of like background stuff going on during that time that moved timelines around, and that caused that whole situation to kind of occur. But yeah, overall, when you are bringing someone in, be prepared to like actually bring them in or make that abundantly clear when you're putting out, I guess, like an application or just asking somebody that that's probably the scenario they're coming into. But looking back on it, and again, I don't have a lot of experience to, kind of refer to or compare to. I feel like involving your characters went pretty smoothly considering kind of the rough ground we were on in the campaign during that time. Like I always really struggle to suspend my disbelief about putting someone new in this group that otherwise would never bring someone new on. Like that's always a struggle just in like the story element of the game, let alone actually like having everyone work well together. So I think the situation or the scenario that we came up with to include Valorant was pretty decent. Like it made sense. It put them on the right path. It explained why they were traveling together for some time, and then eventually kind of naturally forming the group. Um, but I'm sure there are things that we could have done better, or I guess like timeline stuff figured out a bit better. I was also a lot more disorganized back then because that was, I think we were on session 20 when we got to that point when we pulled you guys in, which is a lot of D&D, but we didn't really do a lot during those first 20 sessions. That was another huge thing, which might be our next topic, is my approach to like pacing and story progression and railroading, as the community might call it to some extent, that changed a lot of different times throughout the campaign. I tried a whole handful of different approaches because there were times that the party just did nothing. There were times that the party wanted to do the exact opposite of what we were doing. Like there's a lot of, I don't want to say science, but I guess like there's a lot of analysis that you could do on just how you present situations to your party, how you get them to make decisions, how you decide like when it's time to move and when it's time to slow down, which I don't think I even perfected, but I hope that I got at least mediocre at throughout the entirety of this campaign. So I guess that would be my next question to you, sir. Do you think that pacing improved or changed or could have been better or was tragically not good? That's a term. That's a word.
Pacing was one of the things that we struggled with the most.
Hmm.
And I think that it's one of the things that eventually brought us to the realization that we needed to wrap up.
Hmm.
Um, and it doesn't all fall on the DM. That's one thing that I really want to impress upon the viewers is that pacing is maybe equally the responsibility of the party as well. And it's sort of a skill, or it's something that you have to get a sense of
Hmm.
over time as you play the game, and it's not something that you're ever finished with. I think it's one of those things that's easy to learn, hard to master, right? Um, is the sense of when it's time to move forward, when it's time to change the scene, when it's time to stop asking this NPC questions, or stop, you're sitting by the creek navel gazing filler that you're having with your party member.
Hmm.
Like it's a constant thing that you are assessing and trying to learn that sense, that radar. um and it's just as much the player's responsibility as the DM. um and it's an art, I think, and not a science. Or
Hmm.
it's more art than science, because it is the kind of thing that you just sort of have to feel. You
Well, I
know,
also
you
think that from group to group, it will change drastically. You can't have like one singular approach, or you can't be perfect at it because the people that are engaging in it are completely different people every time.
yeah, well, group to group, session to session, campaign to campaign. Like,
Hmm.
uh, getting back to our campaign specifically, uh, I feel like we were going slow when we should have gone fast, and we were going fast when we should have slowed down. And
Uh-huh.
we never quite figured it out,
Hmm.
in my opinion. But I do think that that's something that we learned the most about, even if we're not done learning about it, going forward into new adventures and campaigns. But that was a struggle from week to week, and I think that's one of the things that frustrated everyone the most.
Hmm.
Whether they talked about it or really admitted it or not, there someone in the group at different points always seemed to have a time of frustration of I don't want to be here anymore, or I wanted to stay there longer, or I really want to get to this thing that I'm excited about and we're never going to get there, like
Hmm.
that. That was a constant struggle. And I don't think it's ever really over because no group of people are all going to have exactly the same goals and things that they're excited about and level of caring about different aspects of the world. But the one of them constant meta game aspects for the DM is learning how to juggle that and try to keep everybody's meter topped off
Hmm.
over time. And it's something that I want to say that they should do a better job of addressing in like the Dungeon Master's Guide, but I don't know how I would begin to write that chapter, so I can hardly criticize them for not including more about it. It's there are big parts of this game that are art,
Hmm.
and that is one of them.
This topic is kind of adjacent or even kind of interacts with this quite often, but it's probably going to be one of the larger points I make. This is more of a DM sided thing, but I guess also applies to players to some extent. The biggest issue that I ran into consistently throughout the game, and this is like, I imagine if any of the players watch this video, this is not an attack on any of you, though it might sound like it initially. The biggest issue I ran into is when you are the DM, you have to really understand what your expectations are and what everyone else's expectations are. And if those don't match, that creates a minefield of problems and hurt feelings and frustrations and everything surrounding that. Because if you are running this game that you want to be this high intrigue political thriller with all these like complicated characters, gray morals, and you bring in players that just want to slay dragons and do cool shit and have like a treasure hoard at the end of the campaign, you are constantly going to be butting heads or trying to pull the campaign in different directions. And we ran into that several times, I guess on both sides, I would say, where the players had a fundamental understanding of what they wanted, and I didn't provide that. And then I wanted to do something very specific that the players did not want to engage in. And it's not that anyone's wrong. It's not that anybody is a bad player or isn't up to the task. It is purely what people are sitting down to play or sitting down or expecting to play or excited to play might be another way to put it. And that would be probably the thing that I would do over the most or try to focus on the most if I went back and started this campaign up again without any of the, I guess, like baggage we have now, is making expectations crystal clear and being really direct about them. Because if you beat around the bush or you kind of let things get pushed in a little bit or change the course farther than you'd like, then you're going to start feeling bad about what you're doing or what you're putting your time into. And then the questions start coming up of like, is this even the game I want to play? Is this even the story I want to tell? And that's not a place you ever want to be in when you're running a game this long, when you have a group relying on you to show up every week to provide the game. So that would overall be one of the larger points I make and something I'm going to focus on really intently with whatever next big project we do or next big campaign we do. And probably would also be my biggest piece of advice to bestow upon any DMs watching this video is make sure that is very, very discussed and clear with your group and that everyone is on the same page because you will have such an easier life if you do that.
It's hard to overstate that tip. Uh, I don't want to confine the concept to session zero, but session zero is a part of it. Agreeing what you are playing. Saying
Mhm.
we're going to play D&D is just the tip of the iceberg because D&D now means 100 different things potentially depending on who's in your group and what the tastes are.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that is something that you want to nail down. And if you don't know what your preferences or expectations are, take the time to figure it out as or get as close as you can. And the something that is good for the entire group to remember is that as the DM, with great power comes great responsibility, right? you're the master of this universe. But one of the things that that means, one of the burdens that you carry as DM is that even though everyone in the group will have a moment when they have to sacrifice some aspect of the campaign, of the story, or of the thing that they find the most fun in order to serve the greater good, the DM is the first person at the table that has to do that. Has to let go of something they were looking forward to, or change something they were planning, or let a character that they like die or fail. The DM is the first person that has to make that sacrifice in order for the group to continue or to have the most total fun. Uh, so if you can set those expectations as good as possible, as well as possible, in the beginning, you will decrease the occurrences of that. You will decrease the amount of time you have to spend consoling yourself for the thing that you really were looking forward to and now have to let go because that's not where the group is going.
I will also add on to that that even though it is the DM's majority burden to kind of, lose certain things or, kind of give up some prep that he made or let the story take a different direction, that also falls on the players a lot. And we ran into a couple of situations where players were not willing to let go of certain things. And sometimes it's a good thing and can create a character moment or a interesting interaction that then, adds to the story and deepens the characters' relationships. But there are times where it just stands in the way of the game being fun for everybody. And so while I imagine a lot of players are kind of already in the mentality of, well, we're the group and the game should go, the direction that the group wants to go, you also have to have the understanding that you are a player in a group. And it is also your responsibility to fit into that, to let go of some things that you might want to do, to adapt to different situations, to have fun in situations that aren't specifically catered for you, because that's part of being a group. That's another thing that I think we weren't terrible at any point, but we certainly got better at as we went along. Again, probably coming down mainly to just communication. One thing that we did that I don't think we ever talked about or publicized is very rarely or occasionally we would stop the game and say, hey, next week, instead of playing a session, we're going to sit down and chat. We're going to talk about the game. We're going to clear some things up. We're going to do a little, I guess, like refresher or catch up on everything that's going on. And I think the game benefited overall because of those. I know that there were a few times where people were less than enthusiastic to forego playing D&D to listen to Nathan talk for far too long. But yeah, I think overall that helped again to readjust expectations, to confront some smaller issues going on, and then make the game even more enjoyable going forward, which is worth the sacrifice of losing 1 week. So.
And I want to be clear in what I was saying. That my message is not, well, you're the DM and it's your problem.
Mhm.
And in fact, I think if you find yourself taking that attitude of, well, he's the DM, it's his problem, you should re-examine your feelings. You should take a look in the mirror a little bit and
Mhm.
think about, what the subtext is that you're sending to the people you're playing with when you take that attitude.
Mhm.
But that's not my message. My message is that the DM has the most responsibility, and remember that as a player and look for opportunities to be a good player, to throw the DM a bone, to help make their job easier in ways that are going to make the campaign better for everybody. Let the villain monologue once in a while. I know it doesn't necessarily make sense, or that your character wouldn't just stand there without, flying at them with their weapons drawn. But let them do it once in a while. If that's what the DM needs, they've been looking forward to this moment. Your campaign will be better for it. if you remember that the DM is a player and let them
Mhm.
have some moments too.
I think, yeah, what you said there at the end is the most prominent thing, and something that I think our group honestly still struggles with because it was very defined in the beginning of the game and is now kind of getting a little better, where it was Nathan's game, Nathan's world, Nathan's story. And I have been trying to stress since day one that even though I come up with the world and I fill it with NPCs and I try and direct where we're going, the story is all about the party and what you guys do and what you guys want and what you go after. And while there is a certain, I guess, dynamic that has to be established there of, yeah, I understand that we're the driving force, but we need to interact with a world that isn't us. There's a meta understanding of this game doesn't happen without the group. If I did want to tell Nathan's story in Nathan's world, I would go write a book. And so that's an example used a million times over in D&D. But that's the one thing that was incredibly frustrating to run into over and over again of, man, I just want the party to have fun. No, you just want to kill us. You just want to take shit away from us. You're trying to trick us into something, or everyone's out to get us. And it's like, I understand where some of those things come from, and a lot of the time they're more jokes than actual like accusations or complaints. But there were some times where it was a genuine frustration of, you guys are. It's not even antagonistic because like having an antagonistic DM player relationship is a thing, but it was just this, I guess, conception that the DM is something different than the party, because the DM is here to tell a story and have fun just as much as the party is, just a different way of doing it.
It's a different position on the team.
Hmm.
You know, the goalkeeper doesn't play the game the same way as the I didn't
Players on the field.
I didn't pick yeah, I didn't as a person trying to score, let's say, I want to
Hmm.
be inclusive of all sports. But the goalkeeper doesn't play the game the same way as everybody else.
Hmm.
Um
But they
that
are trying to achieve the same thing.
yeah, they're still on the team, they're still playing the same game. Um and the my addendum to that, my postscript from a player's perspective is uh if you're the DM, once in a while, I think it can be healthy to stop what you're doing and take a breath and remember the players are so stupid. They're so dumb, you know, and don't, you know, you don't have to take that to heart. Like that's not a maxim to live by,
Hmm.
but just say it to yourself once in a while is what I'm saying, as a way to remind yourself that you, as the being with perfect knowledge of the world, there are things that are obvious to you that you should make sure try to find out, like, is this thing that's obvious to me actually obvious to the players?
Hmm.
And if it isn't, but it need, you know, I need to get that across, how do I reinforce that, or how do I get drive that message home?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say that we have a pretty good DM player dynamic. Obviously, we also do this whole talk show thing as well. We still, all the time, I think it was only like a week or two ago, talk about, I don't think we really communicated there accurately, or how can we do this better, or what like changes can we make so that NPCs feel less, I guess, oppositional. It is an ongoing thing, and you're never going to be 100%. And it's very important because there are, I could point to 100 different scenarios in our game where an NPC was immediately misunderstood and the situation just descended into chaos because of it. So improving that, talking about it, being clear about that is a very important thing to do with your group. So yeah, I certainly double or second that opinion.
And it's best if you can do it in character with NPC interaction or
Hmm.
with the environment. But if the game is really taking a nosedive, don't rule out looking for out of character ways or meta ways to get that message
Yeah.
across. I'm not saying that it's a great idea, but something I've resorted to in the past is asking for an insight check or asking for a wisdom check
Hmm.
from a player. Um, and if they, that's probably a very flawed way of doing it. But if they roll a 10 or above, make it an easy roll, then
Mhm.
I will just tell them something like, "You remember that this NPC 2 weeks ago said this important fact about the quest that
Mhm.
you're on." Or you realize that in this town doing that will get you hung, and you'll be a wanted man. Like,
Yeah.
just, I'm not saying do it exactly that way, because it's probably a really flawed way of going about it. But sometimes there are things that you've just got to communicate. You've just got to get across, or else you are not going to have fun with the game for the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, I think there are ways to salvage miscommunications, or like I don't even want to say miscommunications because that doesn't really capture everything I'm trying to say. But another really good example is like a player will say they want to do something. They want to either attack an NPC or steal a thing or do a thing or sell a thing. And you, as the DM, understand, or at least you think you understand, that their player wouldn't do this with the information that their character knows, if that all makes sense. And so you can step in the way and go, do you really understand what you're doing? Do you really want to do this? But then at that point, I get very concerned that I have too much of a hand in the player's decisions, or that I'm pushing them towards something that they might not want to ultimately do. And then I start questioning myself, are we even playing the game that they want to play? Is it all falling to pieces? And it's a lot simpler just to have a clear understanding from the get-go, because trying to fix it after the fact, there's not a perfect solution to that. It's always going to end with the player either feeling like their agency is stepped upon, the DM feeling like the player doesn't fundamentally understand something, or the situation just being handled incorrectly because no one hit the pause button. So try your best to, I guess, be as present and as accurate with your assumptions and information and notes and all that fun stuff.
And there again, it's an art more so than a science. It's something that you
Mm-hmm.
get a feel for, and that you develop your own finesse for handling.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes innuendo can be worse, because you're trying to fix uncertainty with more uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
So be open to the possibility that if something is about to go really wrong, you could just say, "Hey, look, if you do this, if you do X, Y is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you want?" Uh, just another tool in the toolbox. And don't do anything all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes that might be what's necessary.
So I don't know if you have this on the top of your head, so feel free to have me bring up another point if not ready. Wow, that was a way of bringing that in. As a player, what do you think was the biggest thing you learned or took away from this experience? And it, again, doesn't have to be just part of the campaign. It could be part of the group as a whole. It doesn't have to be part of your character. It could have been something about yourself. It can be pretty vague, but I'm curious what you would attach to this campaign that was like the biggest impact on you.
So I think, in the same way that it's good for the DM to try to clear up misconceptions, or make sure that the things that are obvious are actually obvious, there's a player's side to that relationship of your DM knowing whether or not your DM understands what your character is like, or what your character's motivations are, or what they are after. Um, I would also say that with Valorant, this is very specific to our game, so I don't know if there's a lot of general advice that people can draw from this. I had a concept in my head that I was really excited to try, of a character that was very domineering. Both his background as a noble and his class as a conquest paladin, it was 2 layers deep of, I want what I want, and you're in my way,
Mhm.
kind of behavior. And I knew from the beginning, and I think I told you from the outset, like, this is going to be a tough concept to do well, and we're going to work together to make it work, or to come to an understanding if it's not working. And we
Hmm.
had several conversations to that effect. And I probably will think twice before setting myself up for something that difficult again. That concept. It was a constant. It was a constant thing of assessing, like, is my character working well with the group? Because you need to bring a character that wants to play well
Hmm.
with the rest of the party. And I do think that I was always walking that line. Most of the time, especially by the end, I think we found an equilibrium, we found a balance, and we found a way to make it work in a way that's fun and interesting without giving up too much of who that character was supposed to be.
Hmm.
But I know that I stepped on the line more than once, with a character that the the flames of the it's what my character would do pit of pain were licking my cheeks, uh and it was tough sometimes. And not my next character is going to be different, and it's going to be a while before I try something like that again. I still enjoyed it. He's one of my favorite characters that I've ever played, but I was kind of asking for trouble. I'm a new player in a new group, people that I'm not terribly familiar with, and I'm coming with this concept that could have went really badly,
Hmm.
and in some ways was suboptimal. I One of the things we had to fix was that in trying to portray this domineering character, this uncompromising character, he turned into uh kind of a joke in the early going, kind of a crab. And I never fully shed this meme of, like, oh, cranky Valoran, bitchy Valoran. Uh and we we had more than one conversation about, like, all right, this is the who this character is over here, and how he's coming across is over here.
Hmm.
And um I guess if there's any part of this that is actionable for viewers, if there's any part of this that has tips, um, working with your DM on who your character is doesn't end after session 0, or it doesn't end after your character sheet is
Hmm.
finished. Um, and you should kind of always be thinking about it and working on it, and keeping your DM uh, apprised of the way that you see your character and their goals and motivations.
The piece of advice that I would put out from that topic is it only hinders the game if you as a player try to pull some sneaky shit over on the DM. Like, I cannot describe how infuriating and how infuriated I get when a player is like, "Oh, you'll see." It's like, no, 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 no. I already get surprised 18,000 times each game. I am here to assist you achieving your goals. So if you don't tell me your goals, I can't assist you. And so there were only a handful of times throughout our game where one of the players would be like, "You'll see next Sunday," and I'm like, "Oh, you're never getting inspiration again." But yeah, there were a lot of times where you came to me directly as Valorant, and you were like, "How did this go?" or "How do you feel about this?" or "How can we achieve that?" or "Here is precisely what I want to try and do. How can we maneuver that?" For what it's worth, this would be my little, I guess, response to your analysis of everything. I don't think Valorant was a good choice for this campaign. And that's not me saying Valorant's a bad character, that you played him wrong. I guess even it's a compliment. I think you played him well given the situation you were in. This group wasn't really built to house that personality. The story wasn't really centered around highlighting someone of that nature. Like, so much of the early game of this campaign was, I don't know who you are, go away. And with a character like Valorant, that's really difficult to play well or play in a fun way because it's just him being upset about being denied something he wants. And that gets boring after a while, I imagine, or frustrating, like legitimately frustrating. So I think given the story and the group and everything, you might have had to compromise a little bit on what your image of Valorant was. And I'd say that probably every player does that. Like the character you have in your head probably doesn't translate 100% throughout the campaign. But I think overall, you actually hit a really good spot with Valorant, and that it ended up being a memorable character that no one's ever going to forget. I think every character in our game is going to be memorable in their own way for whatever reason. They all had their moments or their strange memes or behaviors, whatever you want to call it. And Valorant certainly is one of them. And I think that's ultimately, at least what I hope to achieve, is that every character that is brought to the table is remembered after the game ends.
I'll just say here that I tend to agree, and that I want to echo what you're saying about surprising the DM. The impulse to want to set up a mic drop moment for yourself is a strong one, but the you got to let the DM in on the gag, because that's just their role. That's just a part of it, you know. There again, if we go back to the analogy of a team, like the people on your team go to the field with the same plan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there, not to say that there can't be twists or surprises or fun moments like that in D&D, but at the very least, the DM has got to be included in that play. 99% of the time, in order for it not to make things more difficult.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like saying you're going to put on a play, but I'm not going to talk to the lighting department, and I'm not going to talk to the director, and I'm also not going to pull the curtains open. Like, it's you are standing in your own way at that point.
yeah, or playing there again, playing a sport and saying like, I'm gonna score this goal. Wait till you see how. You know, even though you're on the same team, and now are you expecting them to just stand there and watch? That's not,
Mhm.
you know.
No.
Anyway, point made.
Is there anything from your side? Is there anything that you're curious to poke the bear on?
I think that we have covered things pretty extensively. There's a lot of inside baseball in this episode, so if you made it this far, uh, thanks very much. Chances are you're probably one of the people who has been watching Asbiliath Adventures, and this isn't the best place for this, but I'll take the opportunity to say on my behalf that uh, we hope you're not disappointed, or that um, yeah, we appreciate that you've been watching and enjoying, and that you've been along for the ride. Um, for you as the DM, what do you know now that you would want to go back and tell yourself as things were first coming together? Like, hey, man, don't do that. You're gonna hate it.
The first one is, hey, this is not going to last a week. That would be the first thing I tell myself because I don't think we ever stated this. This campaign, when it initially started way back when, was supposed to be 2, maybe 3 weeks max. That's what we built the group around. That's what we sat down to play at the beginning. And then it turned into this 2 year monstrosity. So obviously that would be the first thing I would tell myself is be prepared to now sell your soul to this group for the rest of your life because I don't think any of us are going anywhere. Um, yeah, that was a strange thing to come to terms with throughout the entire campaign. It's like, oh, this isn't just a one shot, or this isn't going to fizzle out. Like this is now a routine part of my life that a lot of my life has now been built around, which is kind of crazy to think about as well. But as far from that, because I think that's kind of an easy answer. Um, Man, this is also kind of generic, but it is true. I would say relax and trust yourself a bit more. I think it's kind of a double-edged sword because there are a lot of things that I think the game has benefited from because I'm so critical of myself. Like I'm constantly rewatching episodes, listening to my speech, listening to my vocab, trying to change my voice or do combat differently or make my maps better, and I think that does improve the game. What's the word I'm looking for? Just exponentially, because you just keep improving, and you can't get worse if you keep improving. But there is a point where you're so doubtful of yourself, where you're so anxious about performing less than your perfect 100%, like that you get in your own head. There was a long time in the middle of the campaign for about like 3 or 4 months where I would wake up Sunday. Sunday is the game that we play our game, and I would be so like anxious and nervous and feel like sick and ill, and I'd be like, I don't have this prepped, I don't have this ready, like I'm sure they're angry about this from last week, and like what if this happens or what if that happens, and is anyone even here having fun anymore? And I psych myself up all day to be like, this is the worst thing ever, and then we sit down and we play and it just goes well. Like, and I think I've seen that said on like Reddit posts and across the internet of people saying like, is it natural to feel this depressed before my game starts? So I don't think it is something unique to me. And I guess the solution really is just like trust that when your players say they're having a good time, they actually are. Even though that might not be true all the time, but we won't touch upon that. Um, Yeah, I think try and relax. This is ultimately supposed to be fun. That was one thing that kind of got lost a little bit in the middle of the campaign as well. Um, yeah, that would be my general advice to myself. Be prepared for the long haul and don't forget to enjoy it. So,
Well, I think that's a fitting note for us to wrap up on. Uh, this is the point where I don't have a transition or a segue. Just like and subscribe,
mhm.
dudes and dudettes. Comment down below, and thanks for watching Ismiliath Adventures and Natural 2.
Yeah, I think I'll echo your statement real quick. If you are one of the people that have stuck with the show for, I guess, the campaign and watched the episodes occasionally or every single one of them, damn, I appreciate you. That is something that tickles me to death. So if you are one of those people, thank you. But with that said, I guess we're done here.
So until next time.